We continue on values and the search for meaningful values and great values in the 21st century. Archaeologists can find campfires going back hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps 200, and I read recently even older than that at a site in Israel. Since time immemorial, people have gathered around these campfires and told stories. Men and women gathered around the fires and told stories. Stories of heroism, stories of daily life, stories of chasing animals, stories of raising corn and crops, stories of gathering in the woods. Now, to set the stage for this final set of chats, I begin with the stories, and I want to explain the most important stories that have been around the world for the last 2,600 years. And so we have to go back to the Axial Age. Think of axles going out to different parts of the world. From 2600 to 200 before the Christian era, in this strange period of time, religions and philosophies showed up around the world. I don't know whether it was a new dawn of consciousness that was coming to people, or whether or not it was language had developed, but it happened all around the world. And so during this Axial Age, there was the birth of Buddhism, which has a marvelous array of stories. Kung Fu Tzu in China started Confucianism, and it also has marvelous stories. Taoism sprang up, Jainism, Hinduism in India, and the Upanishads, with also a wonderful collection of great stories. Zoroastrianism sprang up in Persia, or now what we would call Iraq and Iran. Judaism began earlier than 600 before the Christian era, but from 600 on, it was consolidating itself. The laws were being written down, the 10 Commandments, and also the prophets. Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah came forth, railing up for justice and love. Those were stories, and they were very important. Now, also during that time, the Greek philosophers came forth, and they presented a wider scope of stories, stories about what was important politically, stories about history. There was Homer who was writing. These were great stories that were coming forth. And as Alfred North Whitehead says, everything in philosophy is simply footnotes to Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. And while there's variation in Plato and Aristotle, the fact was they were setting stories and sending different groups of people off to learn about life based on those original stories. I do not want to forget that also there was the Mayan civilization that was coming forth in the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, Belize area, and they were building marvelous architecture. And they were good in terms of mathematics, good in terms of keeping records, good in terms of astronomy. They had, for instance, the zero, almost 2,000 years before Europe did. So around the world, we're having these marvelous stories crop up. And the stories often had a God in them, a God or a great person who was passing on the truths that people should live by. Well, we know that these axial religions from this age of 600 to 200 BC, we know, and we have to say it perhaps with regret, that they are dying out. And I'll explain what I think is the reason why they are losing their power. They provided meaning. People had stories in their heads of who they should be, what was worth doing, what was worth living for, what was worth dying for. And yes, many of those stories were fueled by narcissism. I am better than you. My religion is better than your religion. I have been to an ashram in India. Well, I have been to a Zen Buddhist study center in Japan. People use it for narcissism. And one of the corrupt things of mine is better is that people would have wars on the basis that mine is better. Is India better than China? Is Europe better than the Arabic world? These stories were combative. And we in the 21st century can no longer live that way. We can't say, I'm going to heaven and you're going to hell. I'm better than you. God loves me better than you. We can no longer have that in a dangerous world of chemicals, viruses, bombs, gas. There is so much that can happen that can destroy humanity. And we also face global warming. Whether or not people wanted to admit it or not, there is global warming. And one of the main culprits is the use of coal. Another is the cutting down of forests. But why are these axial religions and philosophies dying out? One of the reasons is because of globalization, where markets are all tied together so that your shirt that you have on may be from cotton in Egypt. It may be that in Egypt they're wearing cotton from Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee and Georgia. The world is intertwined. And one of the things that happens is that people want things. They want to buy. They want to consume. And getting to be the standard for the world is that everybody wants a phone in their pocket that they have. That's part of the electronic revolution. And it's gripping all over the world. And for instance, Apple Computers knows how to sell these throughout China. They're very common in every country now, including Africa, especially in India, South Korea. Everywhere are these phones. Now you could say, well, Frank, why do you think they're dying out? Well, I'm sure there will still be rain dances. I'm sure there will still be people praying for rain. I'm sure that teenagers who are going through the mess of adolescence, where their bodies are growing and they're having different feelings emerge and they're separating from their parents, I'm sure that adolescents will still be drawn to religion. But these signal a new world, the 21st century. And so instead of doing a rain dance or praying to God, people will click and check the weather. And they will see where the jet stream is. They will see whether or not rain is developing in an ocean and coming towards their country. So we're having a totally different mindset coming forth. Now this is good in one way. It's bad if you want to cling to an axial religion. And I want to say that each of these religions had wonderful parts. They had great stories in Buddhism that I love with all my heart. I love some great stories in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, because of course while Judaism was consolidating from 600 to 200, later on Judaism spawned Christianity and Islam. So as these religions die out, we have to look at them again, because one of the things that happened with these various separate religions and philosophies around the world is they did feed into narcissism. Now some people will say, I believe in the whole Bible. Well, they need to read it very carefully. For instance, Psalm 137, that begins with very good poetic remembrances of being not in their own country, they're in captivity, the writer of it is. And he says, we hung our harps upon the willows and wept. I think that is a glorious image. But if you keep reading Psalm 137, you'll see him saying, and it's fine, he said, blessings on you, to pick up a baby, a Babylonian baby, by the heels and dash its brain on a stone. Now, do you think in this modern world we can have someone going to Iraq or Iran and picking up a baby and dashing its head against the stone? Haven't we learned anything from the Nazis who threw babies into a crematorium while they're alive? Haven't we learned anything? Can we allow that anymore? As I said in the last chat, playtime is over. The infantilization of the races has to cease. We're all one now. So here we are in the 21st century with the Axial Age, religions dying and the philosophies not being as important. Who is going to get all their knowledge from Plato or Aristotle now? Aristotle made a lot of mistakes that messed up thinking in the West for 1,600 years. So what do we do when the stories die? Here we are in the 21st century and people are lost. They don't know what to do. What do we do when the stories that have given people hope and driven their lives as to what is worth doing and worth living and dying for begin to fade out? And yes, they are fading out. And so I say that with some sadness and regret, but I say it also because I believe there can be a new birth of values in the 21st century. And we'll begin talking more about that in the coming 5 chats.